Humphrey was one of the more fleshed out characters in Suikoden 1, with the game revealing that he once served in the Imperial Army fighting alongside Emperor Barbarossa in the War of Succession, and that he turned on the Empire 2 years later during the Calica incident. The game also revealed that Humphrey is friends with Joshua Levenheit, the commander of the Dragon Knights. While the game revealed plenty of Humphrey's backstory, he received additional backstory in a short story titled Dragon Awaiting the Wind, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 2, a book that released in Japan in May 2001. This short story explored Humphrey's days as a Centurion in the Imperial Army and covered how he met and befriended Joshua. During this story, Humphrey meets a 10-year-old Milia. As Milia was born in the solar year 437, this places the story in the solar year 447, which is 1 year after the War of Succession and 1 year before the Calica incident. The story begins with Humphrey arriving at Goya Fortress in the Dragon Knights domain. Humphrey had been sent on a special assignment by his commanding officer Gilan to meet with the Dragon Knights. Upon arriving at Goya Fortress, Humphrey's equipment was confiscated and he was escorted inside to wait for his meeting with Joshua, the commander of the Dragon Knights. Hunters in the region that Humphrey's battalion was assigned to had recently reported traces of an unusual beast in the nearby mountains. This beast had scared away all of the wildlife in the mountains and the nearby forests, leaving the hunters unable to earn a living. The hunters cautiously ventured deep into the mountains in search of the beast that scared away all of the animals, and in a cave near the peak of the mountain, they discovered a large beast of overwhelming size which resembled a dragon. The hunters, knowing they couldn't fight a dragon by themselves, appealed to the local garrison of the Imperial Army for assistance. The commander of the local Imperial forces was Gilan, a man with little combat experience and who achieved his rank as commander due to being a member of the nation's aristocracy. Gilan dispatched a unit of soldiers to the mountains to investigate the sightings of a dragon, but when no soldiers returned, Gilan summoned Humphrey. Gilan gleefully told Humphrey of his plan to defeat the dragon, that if word spread of his men defeating a dragon, they'd gain fame across the Empire as the only dragon-killing soldiers in the land. Gilan was reluctant to dispatch his entire force for this task, as he felt the smaller the group, the more fame he and his men would earn. Gilan instructed Humphrey to enlist the aid of the Dragon Knights and that he was to bring back the corpse of the dragon. Humphrey was shocked by the orders, wanting to speak his mind but unable to muster a single word. Gilan considered Humphrey's silence to be compliance and reminded Humphrey that this mission is confidential and that the dragon belongs to him. Gilan had planned to harvest the dragon's organs, as dragon liver and meat are highly coveted for their medicinal properties, which makes them worth a fortune in potch. Arriving at Goya Fortress, Humphrey met with Joshua but chose his words very carefully in fear of sounding like Gilan. Humphrey told Joshua only the details about the sightings of a dragon, the missing soldiers, and that if a dragon truly resides there, it could pose a threat to the people living nearby. Joshua replied that it does sound like a dragon, but that dragons are smarter than people think, and that they don't attack people without good reason, casting doubt on Humphrey's claims on the disappearance of the soldiers Gilan dispatched. Joshua followed up by saying that it's also possible that it may be a wyvern that was spotted on the mountain, but nevertheless it's worth investigating. Humphrey suggested that they travelled together, to which Joshua agreed, but that first he would need to convince several people to allow him to leave the fortress. As commander of the Dragon Knights, Joshua bears the Dragon Rune, the rune which allows dragons to exist in the Suikoden world. The commander of the Dragon Knights normally remains in Goya Fortress, with the Dragon Knights being led into battle by the vice commander. The reason for this is if the commander is killed and the rune is lost, all dragons in the world would perish. Joshua then suggested that Humphrey spend the night and get some rest, and that they'd head out first thing in the morning. Humphrey then asked that when they defeat whatever creature it is, could the Dragon Knights hand over the corpse to him, as he'll need the corpse as proof that the creature has been slain. Humphrey sensed that his words had shaken Joshua and that Joshua's calm demeanour had been rocked. Joshua reluctantly agreed to Humphrey's request and called for a maid to show Humphrey to his room. The maid escorted Humphrey to his room where he would meet the Dragon Knight apprentice Milia and her baby dragon Thrash. Milia was returning the equipment that was confiscated from Humphrey earlier. Milia curiously asked Humphrey many questions. Humphrey was never a social person, he was always quite shy and rarely spoke, but he humoured her curiosity with his typical short responses. Milia then asked Humphrey if he'd ever met a dragon knight called Addy, that she and her dragon Sterling are journeying around the lands outside of the Dragon's Den. Humphrey could see Milia's face glowing red with excitement as she discussed Addy and Sterling, realising that Addy was something of a role model to her. The next morning, Joshua, along with Vice Commander Anos and 9 other Dragon Knights, were waiting outside the fortress for Humphrey. Joshua was the only one without a dragon of his own. A basket was attached to the largest dragon, which Joshua and Humphrey would travel in. Humphrey and the Dragon Knights would then travel to the mountain where the dragon was rumoured to be sighted. Landing at the foot of the mountain, Joshua would order the Dragon Knights to leave and that he and Humphrey would go the rest of the way alone. Vice Commander Anos refused the order, stating that they would remain here and wait for their return. As Joshua and Humphrey made their way up the mountain, the two conversed and got to know each other better. Joshua then revealed the dragon rune to Humphrey, telling Humphrey that if anything should happen to him, that Humphrey needs to return the rune to Anos. As they got further up the mountain, Joshua's pace began to slow down. Humphrey turned around to find Joshua leaning against a tree, as if fatigued and out of breath, with his face turned pure white. A foul stench had filled the air, making it difficult for him to breathe. Humphrey checked on Joshua, who insisted that he's fine, but that there's something wrong with the air here, and that they need to push on so he can verify his worries. Humphrey asked what he meant, but Joshua wouldn't answer. As they neared the cave at the peak of the mountain, the stench intensified. Joshua finally told Humphrey of his worries, that the beast here is definitely a dragon, but that it doesn't appear to be alive. He can feel the spirits of the dead in the air being drawn in by the dragon. The two entered the cave, which was full of yellow mist and stale air, where they spotted a dragon whose scales were rotting and falling off. It was Sterling, the dragon Milia had told Humphrey about the previous day. Joshua reached out to Sterling, calling its name and attempting to calm the beast, but Sterling latched onto Joshua's arm and violently swung him away. Sterling readied a breath of poisonous yellow mist, but Humphrey charged, slashing the dragon's torso. As Sterling staggered, Humphrey spotted wounds in its body filled with arrows. Sterling then lunged at Humphrey, baring its poisonous fangs. Humphrey blocked with all his might as the tip of his blade sliced Sterling's jaw. Sterling once again bore its poisonous fangs at Humphrey, but just then a stalactite fell from the ceiling, hitting the side of Humphrey's head and knocking him to the ground. As Sterling charged Humphrey, Joshua jumped in the way, deflecting Sterling's attacks. Joshua bore no intention of harming the beast and continued attempting to deflect Sterling's attacks, but some of Sterling's attacks skimmed Joshua's body, leaving him with quite a few injuries. The light of the dragon rune then began shining brightly as Joshua called out Sterling's name, commanding it to stop. Sterling came to a complete halt as the light of the dragon rune was being absorbed into Sterling's body. Joshua would then drive his sword into Sterling's head, and as Sterling lay dying, Joshua collapsed by its side, petting its head and shutting its eyes until it no longer moved. Humphrey spotted the body of a decaying woman in a hole in the wall, covered in dried blood and arrows. It was Addy, the dragon knight Milia looked up to. Humphrey removed his cloak and covered her body. Joshua pieced it all together, the arrow wounds in both Addy and Sterling's bodies. Somebody had fired at them and killed Addy, and Sterling, despite its wounds, tried to return Addy's body home, but eventually succumbed to its injuries and turned into a zombie dragon to protect Addy's body. Humphrey then asked Joshua if he could leave the corpse to him. Joshua agreed, as was promised. Humphrey then left the cave and soon returned with some dry vegetation, using it to start a fire to burn the dragon's corpse. Humphrey then revealed the truth to Joshua that he had been sent to recover the dragon's body for his commander to sell, but ever since meeting the people of the Dragon's Den, he's come to view dragons as companions. Some days later, back at the Dragon's Den, Joshua told Humphrey that the doors of the Dragon's Den will always be open for him, and that if he's ever in trouble, the Dragon Knights will assist him. The two smiled and shook hands as Humphrey departed. While the short story only revealed that Addy and Sterling had both been hit by arrows and that Sterling turned into a zombie dragon to protect Addy's body, the Genso Suikoden encyclopedia that released 8 months later revealed a little bit of additional information about their deaths. As the two were flying near the northern checkpoint on a reconnaissance mission, they were shot down by Imperial soldiers who mistook Sterling for a monster. The encyclopedia also mentions that Addy was a Dragon Knight before the War of Succession, suggesting that her and Sterling have been dead for over a year by the events of this short story. And that's it for Humphrey's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Dragon Awaiting the Wind from the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 2 that released in Japan in 2001. Normally I end these videos by reminding you that the games, the manga, the novels, the short stories, the anime, and everything else are all separate entities that are written by different authors. But the characters and events of this short story were referenced in the Genso Suikoden encyclopedia, which does add weight to this being officially part of his canon backstory. So we can safely treat this as part of Humphrey's canon backstory. If you like these shorter stripped down lore videos covering topics which very little lore exists on, let me know in the comments and I'll make more of them. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.